Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 4 of Tough Talk. I am your host, Joe Szymanski, here on Elections Daily. And today we are going to be discussing Massachusetts politics. With me today is Adam Bass. Adam is a reporter. He is one of the more knowledgeable folks about Massachusetts politics on Twitter and is certainly starting up certainly kind of its own little base there. On Twitter, and with me also is the factual prep, also known as Caitlin. Caitlin is a resident in Massachusetts. She also has boatloads of knowledge about the state itself. I'm very excited both of you on today, and I just want to thank both of you for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, and we're going to start, of course, with general questions. I know if you haven't listened in before, the first episode, because the last 2 episodes we have only had 1 person, but we're back to 2. So we're back to the first episode standards. We start with the general question, and Adam will go first on these. So, Adam, what are your expectations for the next 2 years when it comes to governance and legislation in Massachusetts?
Well, thank you so much, Joe. Well, to begin with, Massachusetts politics is all about a couple of phrases I like to think about. If you see a need, fill it. If you don't see a need, don't fill it. The Massachusetts legislation, is run by Democrats, both in the House and in the Senate, and the Massachusetts governorship is run by Charlie Baker, a Republican. Now, because of this, there's usually a discrepancy between the two, and in that regard, you see many bills coming up to Governor Baker's desk, and usually they get signed by him, as Baker is seen as a more moderate Republican. However, in the past couple of days, there were a couple of bills that did not get signed. 2 of the most notable ones are the Roe Act bill, which would allow certain codifications of Roe v. Wade to be enacted into the Massachusetts legislation and law. I'm sorry. And the other one was the climate bill, which would allow net zero emissions by 2050. Baker vetoed both. The Roe Act bill was then overridden by the Massachusetts legislation. And the second one is now being refiled in the Massachusetts State House. Because of this, we're starting to see a bit of a right-leaning shift to Baker, which is very odd. Usually that signals either you're going for a 3rd term or you're trying to go get up the Republican base there, or he's going to do what Mitt Romney did and retire on his own terms. Now, I see the lesser of that least likely to happen. I actually think that Baker might be a little concerned that he might not win a primary, although that is very untrue. But in order to shore up that support, he's going to have to move a little more right. In the House side and the Senate side, we're starting to see a little shift towards the left. Karen Spilka, the Senate president of the Massachusetts State House, is, I would say, very socially left on issues. She was the spearhead champion on the climate bill, very much in favor of the policing bill that was passed. And the House, while certainly run by very prominent figures in Massachusetts politics like Ron Mariano, is also trying to move a little more left. Though, as many activists and voters might see, maybe not left enough. So I think we're going to see a bit of the same old, maybe a little shift towards both polarized sides. But I think sort of the same story in Massachusetts.
Okay, and of course, Caitlin, the same question goes to you. What are your expectations for the next 2 years in Massachusetts when it comes to legislation and that type of thing?
Okay, well, I'm actually a big Charlie Baker fan. I proudly voted for him twice. Honestly, out of him, I just want good governance. Blue state Rs typically have a really hard time. And Massachusetts GOP is not really in a good position right now. I think we can all be straightforward about that. But Charlie Baker is in a strong position. He won pretty handily. He has great approvals across the board. And even if you see a rightward shift, I think that we need to probably look at things like the Roe Act that he vetoed and see issues within the bill that are just not good. And it's okay for him to veto that based on that. And that's what he did. He's definitely a moderate Republican. I just think that he's very much no BS. He's very knowing. I've met him personally. And it just focuses on good governance. As for the Massachusetts State House, it's clearly left-leaning. coming from a red state myself, because I'm not originally from Massachusetts, it was a little eye-opening, kind of moving here, and a little bit of a culture shock, not in a bad way, but still was. So it's more or less what I want out of the next 2 years is good governance out of Charlie Baker. If he decides to run again, he may very well. There's always rumors. I've heard rumors. I don't want to like go all into them tonight, but I do hope that he runs a third time, because I will be voting for him again.
And of course, then we move on to the personal questions. And Caitlin, we'll go back to you here again. You are very vocal online and in person about you are a Republican. You are a strong, not a very right-wing person by any means, but a strong conservative Republican. Right. Governor Baker is certainly a moderate, maybe not as much as Phil Scott in Vermont, but certainly.
I align a lot with Charlie Baker, if that's what we're kind of asking. My personal beliefs, I mean, on things that are socially, quote unquote, liberal, like gay marriage and abortion is a line for me. It is a personal line for me, based on my personal beliefs. It's not even a religious question. It is a moral one. As for LGBT rights and gay marriage, I'm one of those people that believes that maybe the state is not the best way to kind of determine that. And if it things like gay marriage, the most conservative thing is marriage, right? So why not let everyone get married? That's the way that I view it.
Right.
So I agree with the Massachusetts position on that, and I always kind of have.
Okay, but I was going to ask you: do you want to see Governor Baker? Adam kind of mentioned the legislature is trying to shift left in certain ways. They push back by activists. Do you want to see Governor Baker confronting the legislature more on certain issues?
I think that his no nonsense attitude kind of confronts that already, right? So like if you are expecting good governance, see a need, fill it is not always the appropriate position for good governance. And that's where Baker is kind of the line, where he can look at a piece of legislation and maybe that's not the right step for Massachusetts at this current point. So that's where I trust him on doing the right thing. Across the board, I haven't been disappointed for the most part. I was a little, we didn't get pull regs until really late, and that personally affected me, but we got them, and they were sane and usual. So for COVID, obviously, but yeah, that's kind of where I view Governor Baker's role, is being the stopping line and saying, hey, maybe we need to look at how this will work across the board.
Okay, and then Adam, over to you. And you mentioned this also in your first answer, but the Massachusetts State House has a new speaker for the first time in a decade, which whenever that happens, especially in state legislatures, when they have this long time of one-party term dominance, which the Massachusetts State House obviously has, that can obviously sometimes lead to some major changes. So what do you personally expect to see out of this new leadership in the House? Do you expect to see any major changes in style, especially from the past leadership of the last decade?
Well, I'm glad you answered that question. The new speaker is Ron Mariano. He's from Quincy. He is the protege of former Speaker Bob DeLeo, who was part of the 19th district of the Suffolk County. Now, when it comes to leadership, Mariano is very much a doer, not much of a speaker. It's interesting because he had this quote where he said, "I don't know, I just got here," when it came to vaccine distribution, which isn't the best way to go about it, especially when you're supposed to be the Speaker of the House. In terms of what he wants to do, he's on healthcare, more health facilities, especially in those rundown areas. In terms of climate change, he wants to focus on more wind power in the southeast coast of Massachusetts, where it's known to produce quite a bit of wind there and help produce energy coming from there. The one thing I am curious to see what he will talk about is Western Mass and the more not as fortunate communities of Massachusetts, such as areas near Lowell, areas that are in Worcester County, a lot of Massachusetts politics is focused solely on Boston and Beacon Hill. And, this comes from the fact that we've constantly called it the hub of the universe. And the problem is that there's so much more to Massachusetts. Excuse me. There is the East-West Rail Project, which recently got its grants that needs to be funded for. There needs to be talk about the Southeast and how there's not enough vaccinations down there or health sites down there. I think Mariano, if he's going to be a leader, he's going to need to be more active in his role. I know that he is not known to be much of a speaker and much of a in the camera sort of person. There are many politicians who do that. I can think of one off the top of my head, Nancy Pelosi. She's not much of a camera person. She's much more of a doer. But when you're a speaker, especially in a state where people are becoming more and more interested in politics, you're going to have to take more of a role. I expect the Senate to be more of the progressive voice than the House. We will have to see when that happens, but I still expect the status quo of the Senate being the more progressive of the two.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you just for our viewers here, Adam, the Massachusetts State House, as is with a lot of state legislators up there in the Northeast, it's a little bit funky. It's not like how other state houses are in the United States. So I just want to, when it comes to the districts, and you were saying, 19th, Suffolk district, what necessarily you mean by that?
Okay, so it's very, very simple. Suffolk County is basically all of Boston and a little bit of the North Shore. That's Revere, Winthrop, a little, not Salem, that's Essex County. But when it comes to that, Suffolk County is basically distributed into different parts. So, for example, let's say I had a piece of paper and it was split into 4 parts. That each one would be Paper County, and Paper County 1, 2, 3, and 4. And because of that, how Massachusetts distributes its district is based on which county it's in. For Suffolk County, or for any county, they like to do it based on where the lawmakers come from. For example, Bob DeLeo came from Winthrop and Revere. So obviously, 19th Suffolk would be based in that area. It didn't used to be that way. It actually used to be smack dab in the middle of Boston. But because the last speakers are not last lawmakers, I think, was from Boston and Bob DeLeo, then it was moved to Winthrop and Revere. And many of the candidates that are running right now, such as Valentino Capobianco and Alicia Delvante, Delventio. I'm sorry, I'm getting my notes mixed up here. Alicia Delventio came from that area. So when it comes to Massachusetts, we're going to be in that district and really focus on where it comes from.
Okay. Back to the general questions, which means back to you again, Adam. We've talked about, we've already mentioned this already here on the show. Governor Baker, of course. There are no term limits in Massachusetts, but it is not necessarily normal for a governor to seek a third term in the state of Massachusetts. So, of course, Adam, we start with you here. Do you believe that Baker will or will not seek what would be kind of an unprecedented third term for the Massachusetts government?
That's a really good question. Now, when it comes to Massachusetts, we like to do things. I'm sorry, sounding like a snob. I apologize. When it comes to Massachusetts, there tends to be a following of tradition. The executive gets the most spotlight, much like how the Puritans did that. And usually you want to run for 2 terms, set the standard for the rest of the country. Now, usually it's not uncommon for governors to stay for that. Much like take for another Commonwealth, Virginia, it's not uncommon for another governor to run for another term that's not their consecutive term. However, Baker is really pushing his Lieutenant Governor, Karen Polito, to be more in the spotlight. He calls it not the Baker administration, but the Baker-Polito administration. And he's doing something that harkens back to Mitt Romney's final term as governor in 2005. He is shifting more rightward. Now, the rumor is that basically he's going to take more of a national approach. Now, I don't see that happening. I could see him maybe running for Senate if he wants to, but even then, that's really going to be hard. It will be a close race, theoretically. But Mitt Romney, when he was getting ready to go into the national spotlight, he began to move right of his original quote-unquote Brahmin, which is basically a term that's used in Boston to describe someone who is basically center, right-wing, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, in this case, Mormon.
The Boston Brahmins, yes.
Boston Brahmin, yes. You've been reading too.
I know them.
Oh,
I live on the
Anyway.
North Shore.
right. Anyway, so what Baker is doing is that he's making his profile more well known and nationally. One of the first signs we saw that in 2020 was his endorsement of Susan Collins in Maine. And that was kind of a big deal because you never see Baker go out of his home. He stays local. He never talks about what's going on in the national GOP. Even his rebuke against Trump, saying that he should probably step down or resign, that was kind of a big deal. Because unlike Phil Scott, who is a little more vocal, Baker's not. So I don't know what he's going to do. I think he's going to probably run for a third term. If he doesn't, that wouldn't surprise me. But, just keep an eye out for his move towards either the right or not. And obviously just wait until, I think, September 2021. That's when we'll probably get an answer.
Okay. And then, Caitlin, of course, the same question is going to go to you here. Do you mean Adam made some good points, but what do you think really is kind of the mindset going on right now in Governor Baker? Will he try and hand it off to Lieutenant Governor Polito, or do you think he will go for this unprecedented third term, seeing what the environment will be in 2022?
I'm not quite sure on national ambitions right now, to be quite honest. And you hear rumors. I don't know how much I believe them. I think Baker is just being mostly himself, right? So if you see a shift rightward, that's probably just where his personal beliefs are, like with the Roe bill, and maybe even the climate change bill that went through. You're just seeing kind of what his personal beliefs are, and if he believes that was good governance. Okay. As for his positions on national GOP, we could get into what the problems of Massachusetts GOP is right now and how that concerns Charlie Baker, because there's some big problems. And I don't think that that's a secret. The Massachusetts GOP has no money right now. And for Baker having such crazy high approvals, we're not winning down ballot, and that is a problem. So it's one of those things where I think right now the Massachusetts GOP and Charlie Baker are very disconnected between the state party and the governor, and you can just see it. I mean, you read articles in the Boston Globe about the Massachusetts GOP poking at Charlie Baker, and I personally, as a voter and a Republican in the state, it's one of those things where I read it and I'm like, why are we doing this? Why? This guy has astronomical approvals. Why are we poking and prodding at one of the most popular governors in the United States right now? What? Because he doesn't like Trump? It just doesn't make sense to me personally, and it does affect down ballot state issues within the Massachusetts GOP. As for Baker endorsing Collins, I think Baker and Collins are pretty much on the same page on a lot of issues, and they're both moderate Republicans. And Maine is Adam knows, Maine is very different from Massachusetts. And as we saw with the Senate race there and all of the money the Dems dropped into that race and how it affected the race, it is a different state, but I think in the same way the GOP here tried to nationalize a lot of issues over our fundraising platform, and that just didn't work out for the Massachusetts GOP. We're just not bringing in money. As for the Dems in Maine, they tried to nationalize the race for the most part with a lot of platform issues, and it caused a problem for Sarah Gideon, and you could see that in local media. So I don't know. Baker, I don't see national ambitions right now, but I could see a third term coming. I do know the person who, if he's going to get primaried, who would be running against him, and I would still be voting for Baker. So, we've talked about it on my podcast, the Rhino one we did on our first episode. But, it is what it is. Again, I support, obviously, Charlie Baker clearly. So I just don't know. I don't know. Even with Karen Polito, him calling it the Baker-Polito administration, they do work well together as a team. And I think that needs to be boosted. I have appreciated her leadership and taking over, a lot of things that she needed to concerning COVID. So, yeah, that's basically my position on it.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna push you a little bit more here because you did mention this. The state GOP in Massachusetts
You can go ahead and push me. I will tell you everything.
It's recently, the issues that the state GOP has been having have come out quite clearly. And then you look, obviously, the three Northeast Republican governors, the only three Northeast Republicans, only along with Susan Collins. Chris Sununu, this year when he ran for re-election, his coattails were large, switched the New Hampshire House and Senate, and gave Republicans a trifecta in the state when it comes to governance for the first time in decades. Not in decades, but in about a decade. Phil Scott, even in Vermont, Phil Scott had enough coattails to which he broke the veto-proof majority in the Vermont State House.
100% correct, Joe.
Yeah, Charlie Baker. I mean, obviously, it's with Massachusetts. With Vermont and New Hampshire, the 2-year cycles can sometimes make that easier when you're not running and say, of such a negative. When you're only running in a singular pro-Republican midterm and then a very, very much pro-Democratic midterm, right. That can lead to different things. But clearly this is a problem for Baker. He is the only one now that deals with any type of veto-proof majorities in both of his lower houses. So, I mean, do you blame that more on the fact that maybe Baker is just popular to certain sections, just doesn't have the coattails, or you blame it more on the Massachusetts GOP structure, in which it has, as I think all three of us have seen, taken very much a Trumpy stance in a state where Trump, has really kind of tanked some of the normal Republican areas there?
I think you hit the nail on the head on the latter. It is the Massachusetts GOP. Their party structure, how they do any type of PR, is just not okay, and it doesn't appeal to anyone that's not a Trumpy boomer. It is what it is. So when I get emails from the Massachusetts GOP or anything like that, I mean, obviously with COVID, we can't go to a Young Republicans meeting right now, but I feel disconnected a little bit from the state party in that sense. It is very Trumpy right now. I do think that I did see a shift slightly this week in the fundraising emails in tone. Got a little bit more serious. So we'll see how that goes going forward. I don't have a lot of hope right now because it's just one email. I still donate because that's who I am. But at the same time, I'm concerned with Charlie Baker being as popular as he is. We should be able to have down ballot wins. And if that means that him and Jim Lyons sit at a table and finally duke out their differences so we can finally have that, then it needs to happen. But right now, they're just so disconnected. It is a major problem for Massachusetts GOP.
Yeah, and I'm leading now into your second and your last personal question here, Caitlin. Mm-hmm. You've both already brought this up. Both of you have actually. There has been talk really since Baker came out against the president, against former President Donald Trump, way before really even the general election happened. He came out and said, "I will not endorse the president. I will vote for Joe Biden." There's been continuous rumors about someone from Baker's right trying to primary him, even though Baker has these incredible approval ratings. As you've mentioned time and time again, he is incredibly popular in the state. If he runs for re-election again, it is likely he will win with those high approval ratings. But Caitlin, how likely do you think it is that someone from Governor Baker's right, at the very least, makes an attempt, not necessarily beats him, but at least makes an attempt to primary him and, have what more would call a typical Republican run for this seat?
Oh, I've heard that Jeff Deal wants to do this. It's not an if. I think it's more or less like we need to talk about it doing it. To be quite honest.
So you mentioned Jeff Deal.
I think Adam is nodding because he's heard the rumors.
I am. For those who don't know, Jeff Deal was the challenger to Elizabeth Warren in 2018.
Yeah, I was just about to go into that. Deal was obviously the challenger to Warren in 2018. Did maybe a little bit better than people expected him to. Held Warren to under 60%, but Deal is certainly. If you look at his platforms, I wouldn't certainly call him a Charlie Baker type of Republican by any sense of the means. Do you think Deal, if he were to do this, would that be, and if he were to somehow win, would that be damaging then to the kind of the?
Yeah, we would lose.
He would lose.
Let's be honest. I mean, if Deal wins a primary against Charlie Baker, which I doubt, he will win a primary against Charlie Baker. he would lose in the general. Like, that's not even a question in Massachusetts. Like, he will not win. That's one of the reasons why he should not be primarying Charlie Baker. The thing that makes Charlie Baker very successful in Massachusetts is that not that he's a moderate, it's that he focuses on good governance. And that's what Massachusetts really needs. With the high level of like urbanization and the sprawl, the suburban sprawl that we have, the high level of services and all these programs that we have, we just need an effective, governor. Like, that's what he does. So that's the reason why I like him so much. It's just good governance.
Okay, and then so we'll move on to Adam here with his second personal question here. Obviously, now the Democrats, they didn't really try and challenge Baker in 2018. They didn't really make a real attempt there at him. But there are some rumors that they might try and do this a little differently here. There's been a lot more names thrown around. Obviously, Joe Kennedy III, now that he is no longer, I mean, not happening, but his name's been thrown around. But there's many others. Who do you see right now as being the most likely Democratic nominee for a governor in 2022 in Massachusetts?
Well, first of all, let me just say on the record for anyone on social media in Massachusetts politics, I will say this right now. Joe Kennedy III is not happening. Okay? He lost Massachusetts in the Senate. If you're a Kennedy and you lose that state, like, no. And it's clear in his body language he's done. Now, to get back at your question. For now, there's only one person who is declared. Her name is Danielle Allen. She is, I believe, a political scientist. She's written in the Washington Post several times. If she were to be nominated, she would be the first Black woman to be a Democratic candidate for governor. I think she's very interesting. I think she's a name to keep an eye out. But the one person I think that might have a shot, and she has been very, very indicative of this. Her name is Jessie Mermel. Jessie Mermel was a candidate for Massachusetts 4th Congressional District, which I live in and I've covered. She has been very vocal against Charlie Baker, probably the most vocal anti-Baker Democrat so far, at least on social media and in her writing. She wrote an op-ed in WBUR criticizing Baker's good governance and that the vaccine rollout should have been better, as well as talking about how he should have done better with the MBTA rollout program. She is very much not done with politics, even though she is going to be teaching at Boston College. I think that she's going to continue maybe some sort of other career, but she has been very vocal against Baker. But other than that, I have not seen really any sort of other big candidates I can think of right now. Martha Coakley, she's done. She's working at Jewel. Elizabeth Warren staying in the Senate. Ed Markey staying in the Senate. Honestly, the problem with Massachusetts is that even though it's a Democratic state, its strength relies in its incumbency, not in its bench. This is why you see the big sort of primaries in Massachusetts. You saw one in MAO4. You saw one in MAO3 with Lori Trahan. You probably might be able to see it in Boston, in the Boston mayoral race. You might be able to see it in the Holyoke mayor race. These positions last for a very long time. People like their incumbents here. So the problem is that, there's an old saying, wait your turn. How can you wait? How can you build a bench and wait your turn at the same time? It's very unlikely. Finally, I do want to talk about the possibility of Ayanna Pressley running. I know people have been thinking about that. Probably not either. She's probably going to go for maybe Senate if Warren retires, but even then, that's going to be a long time.
So, but I'm going to just push you here a little bit here because you didn't mention a name that I think a lot of people would be thinking about, and that's Attorney General Maura Healey. You mentioned Martha Coakley. You mentioned the two senators. But Maura Healey is someone who I do think has at least been making overtures. We don't know if she'll run against Baker, but certainly she's been making overtures. She's been looking into it, I think that's quite clearly. She probably is the only statewide elected official in Massachusetts currently who, if they would run against Baker, would probably even stand a chance right now. If Healey were to get in, how competitive do you think this race would get?
Probably a little competitive, but the idea of Healey going in is actually very slim at this point. Here's the thing. Massachusetts, one of the most coveted positions aside from governor is the attorney general. It is one of those states. This is probably the most treasured position of power that you could have here. And Healey loves her position as attorney general. She's one of the most vocal of the Democratic attorney generals in the country. She really likes having that oversight. And, if I were her in her shoes, I'd be like, well, do I stay with the job I really, really like and make a legacy for myself? Or do I go to a bigger job? And yes, Massachusetts governor is very nice, but, this is me. I'm the attorney general. I wouldn't have it any other way.
That's really interesting. But as we move into our final question here tonight, and again, Adam, we'll stick with you here for this one. We're going to move maybe away from Massachusetts in general, and we're going to focus on that shining beacon of light, as you both called it. We're going to move on to Boston a little bit here for our final question tonight. Marty Walsh has been nominated by President Joe Biden to be the new Secretary of Labor. Walsh was originally planning to run for re-election as Boston's mayor. Obviously, even with the 50-50 tie in the Senate, we expect him to be confirmed as Secretary of Labor. Adam, we'll start with you here for the final question of the night. Who do you see as Boston's next mayor?
Well, to start off, technically, we will already have a next mayor. We will have acting mayor Kim Janey. She is the city council president, and she would be, without 100%, the first Black woman mayor of Boston. In terms of who's next mayor, if she chooses to run again, I'd say Kim Janey. Look, again, the power of incumbency is strong in this state. And I don't really see a reason to get, quote unquote, remove Janey if she becomes mayor. I know that there are two other big names, Michelle Wu and Andrea Campbell. Both are very popular, but both of them do well within the upper class area of Boston, Beacon Hill, Back Bay, the North End. I'm not so sure how well they do in areas like West Roxbury. They'll do okay in West Roxbury, but in areas like Roxbury, Rossie, Dorchester, Mattapan, how will they do in Alston? The neighborhoods of Boston tell very different stories from just the whole city itself, and each of them are going to have their own say. So the fact that Janey is going to be, and here's the thing, if Mayor Walsh would have ran, he would have won, because not many people of Boston don't really dislike him that much. I know there are plenty online who do, and they all have their perfect say, but the majority would say, he's fine. He comes from Dorchester and Mattapan. We love him there. Janey also comes from those areas. So, it feels like a direct succession. We may be the first state to really call for a revolution and the end of the king, but we still have our heirs and our lineages here. So, I think it's going to be Janey, and I don't know unless she doesn't run.
I'll just push you a little bit here. Michael Flaherty. I don't know how you would necessarily say his name. He is another at-large councilman. He has also been kind of rumored to run. I've heard at the very least he could run. Is he a candidate that could maybe he's run for this type of position before? He was, I believe, formerly a council president. If he were to enter this race, do you think that would maybe shake things up a bit, even with Janey already potentially in? Do you think that could be something that would shake up this race enough a little bit that it would make it a incredibly close primary, at least?
I'm not entirely sure. The problem with that would be Flaherty would need to get his name recognition out, and fast. One of the advantages that both Wu and Campbell had was name recognition. Wu was very fortunate enough to pick up some of Ed Markey's alumni from the quote-unquote Markeyverse and turn into the quote-unquote Wooniverse. And, those are the more well-off college kids who really helped Ed Markey go back to the Senate. But at the same time, it's like, well, Boston's not going to mind if they have a Black woman mayor. We've been having Irish white guys as mayors for a long time. And, I don't see a reason to just put another one in, because it's the status quo, and we like our status quo. To add on what Caitlin said, why Massachusetts leaders have such high ratings. It's because our status quo, compared to like other states like Alabama or Mississippi, I totally apologize for those who live in those states. They're probably great. But we kind of have that little bubble around us, and we like our bubble. So it's like, why pop the bubble?
I think that makes a lot of sense, at least to a certain extent. But Caitlin, kind of the same question to you here. And, obviously Republicans in Boston is not really a thing to any certain
extent. It is a club, not a party. Let's be honest in downtown Boston. Again, I live on the North Shore, so the Boston mayor race doesn't really affect me that much. But I do agree with Adam's point. It's probably going to be Janie. Massachusetts just likes their successors and incumbents. I do agree with that position. So if she runs, she'll probably get it. And it does have to do with name recognition. Again, yeah, I agree with that. So, and everything that Adam said there was correct. Very correct.
I think that's true. But, 2021, we're going into it. It's uncertain, as is all things in politics. It's uncertain with how, people are going to react to the Biden administration. Do you think there's any way, certainly not a right-wing candidate, but theoretically a more centrist candidate? We've sometimes seen this happen before, in these, off-year elections where sometimes
like the Weld movement when he came in. I don't see one right now. I think the state party is in pretty bad state right now, and I just don't see that candidate coming out of the woodwork. I haven't heard any rumors according to that. I do definitely think it might be Janie. I haven't heard Michael Flaherty, but I did hear about Janie, and definitely Michelle Wu. Those are the big names I've been reading in the Boston Globe. But again, Boston mayor race, that doesn't affect me because I live up on the North Shore. And we definitely have different struggles and things that we have to do up here. So it's a little different. I do like the localism of kind of Boston and how town politics matters. So I think Adam can appreciate that as well.
Okay, but I think that will end us tonight. Adam and Caitlin, I want to thank both of you for coming on with me tonight. I think that was another good discussion on Massachusetts politics. Obviously, with that open rules race, not necessarily the state itself, but the city of Boston will certainly be in the news politically for the remainder of the year. And with Governor Baker, no matter what he decides, that will make that race certainly something to pay attention to in 2022. I want to thank you both for coming on tonight. And then otherwise, I want to thank all of our viewers tonight for coming on to another episode of Tough Talk. I am Joe Szymanski. We will be back next week with a Virginia update. Guests still to be determined, but we will be back next week with a Virginia 2021 update. Thank you all for watching, and have a excellent night. And continue to stay safe out there as we get through